Hello, my name is Jacob Schroeder, and I am an economics and history major here at Vanderbilt University. And this semester, I was honored to be a part of the Buchanan Fellowship, where I got to really dive into my passion for Vanderbilt's history and create this awesome case on the history of our founder, Hieronymus McTeer. And so what's really interesting is a lot of people, even students at the school, weren't aware that McTeer was actually the founder of Vanderbilt University, not Cornelius Vanderbilt. So it really ties well into our broader theme of the hidden figures of Vanderbilt University. So to start out with this case, I was already really interested in special collections work, the history of the school, and I had a decent background, but actually getting to work with these tangible items and curated collection was a totally different skill set. So under the mentorship of Celia and Mary, I actually really got to dive into these really fascinating objects that didn't have a lot of information available on them. So I had to go kind of explore to get background on them. And I started out with this right here. This is a doorknob that was furnished by Cornelius Vanderbilt, and it's from the actual home on campus, the campus residence of Hieronymus McTeer. And if you look really closely at it, there's a railroad engraved on the actual doorknob, which kind of shows that it was a really expensive gift from the Commodore himself when he donated it to the school. So objects like that were really trying to emphasize some of the ways that McTeer, who actually came up with the idea of making a Methodist school, some of the ways he worked with Cornelius Vanderbilt to actually create the school. And that goes on to our other item right here, which is the actual letter McTeer wrote saying that he procured the grounds of this institution. And so that was written in 1873, and it was just really interesting to see his handwriting saying, hey, we got these grounds right here. This is where we want to build the university. And I also included a photo of a younger version of McTeer, younger than when he actually founded the school. And so I really wanted to try to incorporate something where you could see what he actually looked like. And if you look right back here, he actually was at the very convention, the 1858 convention, when they actually came up with the idea of making this school. And so the 1858 engraving right here, and this is a reproduction from some steel engravings that were made, there wasn't a lot of information available, and I had to go into some sort of a scavenger hunt to really find out what the story was behind it. So this was actually drawn when they had the convention in May 1st of 1858 through June. June 1st is when they had this really important convention, and general conventions was something I wasn't even aware that churches had these giant conventions. They're really, really important, and this one was actually hosted at the Capitol building, and that was even before the Capitol building was open to the public. So this was a really significant occasion that they got to use that facility. So they really wanted to honor it with these drawings. And so we also have John Wesley up here, who is the founder of the Methodist Church. He's there in spirit. He actually wasn't alive at the time. And another interesting figure, in addition to McTeer, who's over here, was an African-American porter. And he actually, his name is not included in any documents, so I really wanted to figure out what the story was of him, since all the other people on the list, all 151 delegates from all the southern states except Maryland and Delaware, they're all here, but this one porter, his name wasn't listed. So I had to try to dive into different books in the archives to figure out more background about it. So that was a really interesting scavenger hunt. I didn't actually find out his name, but it turned out that he was a preacher, and that was just some really interesting information. And then going on to some of these other two items in the case, I really wanted to look at some of McTeer's diverse perspectives, and he's a very multifaceted character. Unfortunately, he had some of the commonly held beliefs of a white Southerner at the time. He was born in South Carolina to a cotton farmer, and so he wrote this book called Master and Servant, and this is a first edition copy we have here in the case. And it basically says that he believes that the institution of slavery is affirmed by the will of God. And as a bishop, as a preacher, this was a very, actually an anomaly he held. That was an anomaly of a view he held, because it was different from a lot of what the abolitionists believed, which was that slavery was against the will of God. But at the same time, he kind of stood away from the rest of the church in believing that they could be saved. And so what's remarkable about that document is a lot of African Americans were in the Methodist Church at the time. In fact, the Methodist Episcopal Church South had the largest amount of African Americans of any other religious institution in the United States. And that was back during the Civil War. And right after the Civil War, they had all of these freed slaves that still had religious needs. And they recognized that they needed to have their own separate institution if they were able to really get what they needed out of it. And so in 1866, at another general conference just like this, Bishop McTeer kind of helped come up with the idea that they needed to have a colored Methodist Episcopal Church South. And he worked on, so this was signed in 1870, just a few years after the Civil War. He actually helped nominate one of the first two bishops, Richard Vanderhorst, to the colored Methodist Episcopal Church, which is now known as the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church South. So it was really interesting to see that shift in personality of, he was always kind of believing that African Americans could be saved, but he got a lot more involved in them actually having positions of power within church institutions. So I wanted to try to walk through this case of not only the history of his connections to the school, but kind of investigate his multifaceted personality. And as someone who actually lives in McTeer Hall, which is the international dorm on campus, it's really interesting to get to know who the namesake was of this. And it was just an awesome opportunity to not only dive into my passion and enthusiasm for the history of this campus, but work with an incredible group of scholars as part of the Buchanan Fellowship program. Thank you.